My name is Diaz, and today we're going to be talking about Puerto Rican independence.
Of New York's 8 million people, 500,000 are Puerto Ricans.
Recently, I read this article, Let Puerto Rico Be Free by Hakira Diaz. For some general context things, it was published by The Atlantic on September 20th, 2022. Now, I know what you're thinking, that was 3 years ago. What gives? Aren't there more pressing matters? And to that, I raise to you Bad Bunny. If you don't know who I'm talking about or why I bring him up, a few months ago in early October, Bad Bunny was announced to be performing for the Super Bowl halftime show. Many football fans have voiced their thoughts on the announcement, including President Trump. On Newsmax's George Kelly reports, where he said, Never heard of him. I don't know who he is. I don't know why they're doing it. It's crazy. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. President Trump's comments on the announcement echo others who don't believe Bad Bunny represents American values and could divide the nation even more with an all-Spanish set list. A petition on change.org was even made to replace the Puerto Rican headliner with someone more American like country legend George Strait. Currently, it has over 100,000 signatures. Though Diaz didn't write this in mind, it was 4 years later, hello, the issue of Puerto Rico's American identity is more relevant than ever before, I think. But Diaz was writing with hurricane season in mind. Days before the Atlantic piece was published, Hurricane Fiona triggered catastrophic flooding and worsened conditions on the island with a territory-wide outage. This frames the debate of Puerto Rican statehood, independence, and its Commonwealth/territory status through hurricane devastation and Puerto Rico's resilience throughout history. All this is packaged to readers of The Atlantic who are more left-leaning and well-educated. Those readers could be on the fence or apathetic towards Puerto Rican statehood/independence because of the lack of education done towards what the United States did to Puerto Rico. And outside of that, larger picture-wise, there are the lawmakers and political figures that have the power to advocate for Puerto Rico's independence, and those readers can also advocate for Puerto Rico's independence through their lawmakers by, calling them and sending letters, emails, that sort of thing. So she opens the piece by vividly depicting the buildup and landing of Hurricane Irma. In 2017, as summer ends, when news anchors first mention the oncoming of Hurricane Irma, the people go to the big box store or the Econo's supermarket just a few minutes from home. They try to stock up, but by the time they arrive, the lines are long and most of the shops are running low. They get what they can, some food, a few gallons of water, a portable gas-powered hot plate in case they lose power. They refill their prescriptions and then fill the gas tank after waiting in an hours-long line at the Puma station. This expository scene works through her credibility as she proves she is knowledgeable of current Puerto Rican issues. She spends the entire opening, more than just this paragraph, establishing the emotional damage done by the hurricanes and the stress that they are currently under, and how Puerto Ricans are trying to manage without the help from the government and other aid organizations. All of this sets the stage for her argument, so she can use the feelings of stress and mourning she evoked in the opening scene so her audience could empathize. Diaz aims to plead the case that Puerto Rico should be free because Puerto Rico has always been independent, since they've always had to take care of themselves. Now, we don't have the time to go paragraph by paragraph to talk about each piece of evidence and its effectiveness and whatnot, because that would make this video longer than it needs to be. So I want to pick out a few pieces of Diaz's argument that I found particularly compelling, but I do recommend, if you have the time to read the article, read it, because I think it's really interesting, and I think it frames the debate of Puerto Rican statehood in a really interesting light, considering the recent hurricanes. Diaz structures her piece through personal anecdotes and historical context. Diaz is well aware that her audience doesn't know Puerto Rican history and provides the necessary information. She explains, the United States seized Puerto Rico from Spain in 1898 during the Spanish-American War. Today, although Puerto Rico has its own national identity, its official political status is neither as a U.S. state nor as a sovereign nation, rather as technically an unincorporated territory. Her audience, though American, doesn't know how Puerto Rico became a territory. Brief aside for some personal lore, I am Puerto Rican and Salvadorian, but I'm also American. Born and bred, I went to public school in the Great Garden State. Shout out to Taylor Ham. I will always love you. Anyways, growing up, I think anyone who went to public school, and maybe this is just school in general, can agree that our history curriculum has always been lacking. There's always things teachers miss and gloss over, which isn't their fault. I don't think teachers are underpaid as enough, and, I love all my teachers. Y'all were really going through it. But what I'm trying to say is Diaz has a lot of work to do. Educate and convince her audience of both the importance of her argument and why they should vouch for Puerto Rico's independence. Through all this historical context, Diaz also shows her grasp on the issue and her ability to convey that knowledge in a way that her audience can understand. Additionally, Diaz details specific legislation that greatly impacted Puerto Rico's identity, and it ultimately acts to further her integrity as a writer. One law in particularly, Law 116, forced 97 sterilization by means of tubal ligation or hysterectomy, but many thousands of other women were effectively coerced into the same procedures, led to believe that sterilization was reversible. At that time, women were threatened and given no other option except sterilization. She later uses this information to layer another piece of evidence to further her case. Diaz displays how she's in touch with Puerto Rican issues and foundational parts of Puerto Rican history that are so important, and has Puerto Rico's best interest in mind, which just furthers her trustworthiness. Now, this might be nerdy to mention, but one of my favorite and I think more interesting things Diaz does is demonstrate how the treatment of Puerto Rico is similar to how the United States treated African Americans and Hawaiians. This is all meant to draw a parallel and move her audience to care about the independence of Puerto Rico, considering they most likely care about how African Americans and Hawaiians are treated, or were treated. Well, are treated. In the section titled La Operación, Diaz revisits the forced sterilization of Puerto Rican women, many of whom were Black or darker skinned. Through this, Diaz calls on her family's history and experience of this time and how eugenics forwarded this narrative that Puerto Rico was impoverished because of overpopulation. Diaz also cites the infamous Tuskegee syphilis study, which was being conducted on Black men in Alabama, and simultaneously, the 1950s experimental pharmaceutical contraceptives were tested on unknowing Puerto Rican women. This comparison specifically draws the audience's attention to the medical abuses done to Black men in America and how that it is no different from the abuses done to Puerto Rican women who, once again, were Black or darker skinned. Her audience is also most likely more familiar with the Tuskegee study and has negative emotions towards it. And with that, she's connecting those similar exploitations to motivate the audience to reevaluate their stance on the issue. Discussing Hawaii's relevance, Diaz again compares Puerto Rico with Hawaii to draw a conclusion. She uses Hawaii as a case, in which statehood would also ensure that even more Americans would move to Puerto Rico, displacing even more Puerto Ricans and putting even more non-Puerto Ricans into positions of power. It's really no surprise how Americans view Puerto Rico and Hawaii as vacation destinations and nothing more, which I think makes the use of Hawaii as a piece of evidence even more relevant. Recently, Hawaiian natives have been especially pleading with tourists not to visit. But it's hard for that to happen when corporations and gentrifiers already have a monopoly. Like, there is a Disney resort in Hawaii. Come on. In both cases, natives are being pushed out of their homes to make way for mainland Americans. Diaz refutes any possibility of statehood by using Hawaii as an example for what would happen to Puerto Rico. And this works to advance her argument that what Puerto Rico needs is not statehood, but freedom from America. She illustrates this displacement through statistics. Approximately 43% of all Puerto Ricans live below the poverty line and struggle to find work. The median household income is $21,058. Less than half the median income in Mississippi, the poorest American state. Diaz not only furthers her credibility with, again, her grasp on the issue, but with Mississippi as a comparison, Diaz in a way shows that Puerto Rico is facing similar problems that many Americans are facing as well, and stirs up a frustration in the audience by portraying the poverty in Puerto Rico so they can then be motivated to take action. Through another parallel, Diaz recounts the brief time that Puerto Rico had a form of sovereignty in 1897 given to them by Spain. Shortly after this, the US captured the island to create their own colonial government, as was mentioned previously. Following this takeover, the United States implemented the Jones Act of 1917, which granted a form of second-class citizenship to the most people born in Puerto Rico. Within weeks, it passed a second law, making Puerto Ricans eligible for the military draft. She continues by saying, as now, they did not have any voting representatives in Congress and could not vote in presidential elections. By referencing the Jones Act and its use to disenfranchise Puerto Ricans simply so they can fight in the military, Diaz connects the past and the present, how the United States treated Puerto Ricans in the past and their current lack of autonomy. Considering how our country was built on freedom and taxation without representation, Diaz is hoping that Americans feel upset for how Puerto Ricans were treated previously so that those feelings can be translated to Puerto Ricans today. Diaz draws on similar sentiments of freedom and the significance of community to illustrate Puerto Rico's identity and how that could relate to Americans. When discussing her uncle, who she visits whenever she can, she mentions his retirement plan to not leave the island. The people take care of one another in Yabucoa, he said, as they did in Comerillo. The people, not the government, will ensure Puerto Rico's recovery. Here, Diaz uses her uncle to demonstrate the importance of community within the island and its weight as a symbol of resilience and unity. Through this emotional connection, Diaz is implying that the Puerto Rican community is no different from American community without explicitly stating this connection. Likewise, it goes back to her opening paragraphs with how Puerto Rico is already independent and how citizens take care of each other rather than government intervention. Similarly, Diaz also notes Law 53, which is meant to emotionally influence her audience through anger and feelings of injustice because of her audience's connection to freedom. Law 53, Diaz refers to as La Ley de la Mordaza, which is also widely referred to as the gag law, and it made flying Puerto Rican flags, even privately, illegal. More than banning the flag, Diaz explains further it was a crime to sing Puerto Rican national anthem, to speak out against the United States, and to speak, organize, or assemble in favor of independence. Diaz understands that the United States was built on free speech, so by saying authorities punished Puerto Ricans for just being Puerto Rican, she's calling on Americans' association with freedom of speech to enrage them over the inequality Puerto Rico endured. Even in the photographs by Christopher Gregory Rivera, Diaz draws on American ideas of liberty. The cover image used in the article seems to be a visual reference to the Delaware crossing. The posture of the boy in the center clinging onto a lamppost with the Puerto Rican flag and a crowd behind him echoes that infamous time in history so many of us know where Washington led his men into the middle of the night to free the United States from Great Britain on an ambush on Christmas Day. There's something inspiring in both, like a feeling deep in your stomach where I cannot help but feel proud to be both Puerto Rican and American. And Diaz uses those emotions of hope and perseverance related to the Delaware crossing to link both the infant America and the yet-to-be-free Puerto Rico. The debate surrounding Puerto Rico's current state as a possible state or sovereignty is a complicated one. With arguments for both sides, Diaz is able to effectively address this issue through her persistent use of American and Puerto Rican history to portray America's failings against the island that forced Puerto Ricans to advocate for themselves and defend their integrity. Diaz appeals to her audience's identity as Americans, their relationships to specific values, and with comparisons to America's past. All of this works to relate her diverse audience through the Atlantic and prove why Puerto Rico should be independent. I hope you all enjoyed hearing me talk about this article. There's so much more I could say. But like I said, I hope you are able to read this article on your own time. And maybe you agree with me, maybe you don't, but I really did find myself reconnecting with my own history as American and Puerto Rican and my family's ties to these certain issues. So if you want to join the fight for Puerto Rican independence, then contact your reps. It's their job to listen to the needs of their constituents. So link is in the description to find who your reps are if you don't know them, along with all of the sources I referenced today. I hope y'all have a lovely rest of your day. Bye!